Welcome, focused learners, to our latest study. We've got a truly mind-bending topic to unpack today. Imagine someone handing you a massive 14,000-word architectural blueprint, but instead of a building, it's literally a schematic for the end of time itself. The sheer level of detail we're about to look at is absolutely staggering. What we're doing today is impartially deconstructing this enormous prophetic blueprint, which comes to us directly from a presentation on the YouTube channel The Coolest Cat 7729. And hey, if you want to dig into the primary source material yourself after we're done, we've linked it right below this study in the description. Our goal today is just to give you a full, immersive summary of the speaker's incredibly complex biblical calculations. We're looking at a deeply structured theory that essentially tries to pinpoint the exact timing of the end of the world by layering ancient biblical history right on top of modern geopolitics.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of it all, we're breaking this study down into 6 distinct phases. First, decoding the prophecy. Second, God's true calendar. Then we'll hit the first covenant, the Sinai connection, Mount Zion and Hebrews, and finally, phase 6, where the tracks converge.
All right, part 1, decoding the prophecy, the parallel tracks.
So the whole foundation of this theory relies on a concept the speaker calls the two parallel tracks. According to the creator of this presentation, God doesn't just operate on one simple linear timeline. Instead, imagine 2 distinct tracks running concurrently throughout human history. And the speaker argues that we are rapidly, and I mean rapidly, approaching the precise moment where these 2 tracks are going to violently smash into each other. Let's look at the contrast here. On one side, you have track 1. This is the modern political timeline. We're talking about all the unprecedented geopolitical chaos and global conflict we see today. The speaker actually points to specific political figures, most notably Donald Trump, as key historical markers on this track. They theorize that all of this wild political maneuvering is setting the stage for a deceptive global declaration of peace and safety, which serves as the ultimate trigger. Now, on the other side, we have track 2. This is the ancient, deeply typological biblical timeline. No politicians here. This track operates entirely on specific historical patterns, specifically the terrifying events at Mount Sinai, and it's tied to a highly specific mathematical lunar calendar. The entire point of this massive 14,000-word undertaking is to prove that God engineered these 2 completely different tracks to collide on one exact day. Moving right along to part 2, God's true calendar, reading the skies.
Now, to understand when this massive collision is supposed to happen, we first have to wrap our heads around how the speaker measures time. And to do that, you basically have to throw out everything you know about modern calendars. The standard Gregorian calendar, out the window. But surprisingly, they also reject the traditional Jewish calendar used today. You see, the traditional Jewish calendar relies on spotting the sliver moon, that first tiny little crescent of light, to mark a new month. But the speaker argues that method was actually adopted during their historical exile in Babylon, making it a Babylonian corruption of God's original design. And this is where the linguistic deep dive gets really fascinating. The entire calendar theory rests on the translation of a Hebrew root word, kaseh. The speaker points out that kaseh only shows up twice in the entire Bible, and it literally translates to both appointed time and full moon. So in this theory, a true biblical month doesn't start with a sliver of light. It mathematically begins exactly on the day of a bright full moon. To back this up, the speaker points straight to Psalm 81:3. By taking the translation that says to sound the horn on the day of the full moon when the festival begins, they establish a totally concrete baseline for time. Think about how we track our schedules with digital calendars and smartwatches, right? Now imagine tying the fate of the entire world to the undeniable mathematical cycle of a full moon. According to the speaker's calculations, in the year 2026, the full moon landed exactly on July 1st. Because of that, July 1st officially kicked off the beginning of the highly crucial 3rd month in God's true calendar. For the speaker, this isn't just cool astronomy. It's the start of a divine, day-by-day countdown that the rest of their entire mathematical theory absolutely hinges on. Which brings us to part 3, the first covenant, bloodlines and shadows. So, with the calendar locked in, we actually have to rewind all the way back to Genesis. The speaker argues that if you want to understand the end of the world, you have to meticulously analyze the very beginning, specifically the life of Abraham. And the linguistic analysis here is pretty mind-blowing.
They point out that the first time the word Hebrew is ever used in the Bible is in Genesis 14, talking about Abram. But in the ancient literal translation, that word actually means foreigner, one from beyond, or to pass over. The speaker brilliantly takes that ancient definition and applies it to the modern believer. They're arguing that true followers are literally, by definition, foreigners who are destined to pass over from this corrupted world into another one. It's an incredibly powerful argument that says the spiritual church isn't some new invention, but rather the ultimate intended fulfillment of this ancient physical bloodline. And the speaker doesn't stop there with the translations. They look at how God introduced himself to Abraham as El Shaddai, which our modern Bibles usually just translate as Almighty God. But get this, the actual root word, shaddad, is way more aggressive. It translates to spoil, destroy, or lay waste. Now you might be wondering, why on earth would the creator of the universe introduce himself to the father of faith as a spoiler? Well, the speaker's theological take is that God was introducing himself as a massive, world-altering force who actively uses, spoils, and destroys world leaders and empires to get what he wants. And you can see how this perfectly loops right back into track 1, right? It justifies why they include political figures like Donald Trump in the theory. God is acting as the ultimate spoiler of human geopolitics. And according to the speaker, God deliberately saved his more intimate name, Jehovah, for a later, pivotal marriage covenant with his people. Okay, so here's where the timeline gets crucial. You have to visualize this very specific scene from Genesis 15. Imagine Abraham falling into this deep sleep as the sun sets, and suddenly he's surrounded by this thick and dreadful darkness. Inside this terrifying vision, God makes a covenant and prophesies that Abraham's descendants will be enslaved for exactly 400 years. The speaker puts a massive emphasis on the fact that exactly 430 years later, on what the text literally calls the self-same day, the Israelites are miraculously freed from Egypt. The whole point of building this narrative is to prove one vital thing. God does not do approximations. He operates with flawless, absolute mathematical precision down to the very day on the calendar, and that precision sets the stage for the massive future calculations we're about to get into. All right, part 4, the Sinai connection, a terrifying introduction.
So this timeline takes us straight from the triumphant Exodus right into the brutal, unforgiving desert. And it's right here at the base of Mount Sinai that the speaker claims to have found the actual step-by-step blueprint for the modern rapture. It really brings up the million-dollar question that drives this entire 14,000-word study. How does a 4,000-year-old event at an ancient mountain give us the exact calendar date for the end of the world? This is where the speaker's logic gets laser-focused, relying entirely on the full moon calendar we talked about earlier. Their argument is that Sinai wasn't just ancient history. It was essentially a dress rehearsal, a perfect typology showing exactly how God is going to pull his followers from the earth.
Let's actually walk through the math the speaker pulls from Exodus chapter 19. The text says the Israelites arrive in the Sinai desert in the 3rd month. The speaker calculates that arrival happens exactly on the 15th day of that month. Then, God tells Moses to have everyone wash their clothes and sanctify themselves for 2 full days of waiting. That's the 16th and the 17th. Can you even imagine the anticipation in that camp for 48 hours? God then promises that on the 3rd day, he is going to descend in the sight of everyone. Well, you do the math, and that lands us precisely on the 18th day of the 3rd month. So what actually goes down on that 18th day? The speaker points out the physical phenomena recorded in the text. And let me tell you, it is not some peaceful, meditative, spiritual encounter. We're talking thick, dark clouds engulfing the peak, terrifying thunder and lightning, a trumpet blast that just keeps getting longer and louder, the literal ground shaking violently, and then the booming, audible voice of God. The speaker emphasizes over and over that this isn't just a Sunday school story. They firmly assert that this exact sensory overload sequence of terrifying events is the literal physical blueprint for what the whole world is going to experience on the day of the rapture.
Part 5, Mount Zion and Hebrews, the better promise.
To lock this connection in, the study pivots from the desert of the Old Testament straight over to the New Testament. The speaker uses the book of Hebrews to mirror what happened at Sinai, arguing that the New Testament finalized the promises that the ancient Israelites were too terrified to accept. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole comparison. Look at how the author of Hebrews contrasts the 2 mountains. Mount Sinai was entirely earthly, physical, and defined by absolute fear, fire, and the strictness of the Old Covenant. The Israelites literally begged for God's voice to stop because they were so terrified. But in stark contrast, the speaker points out that true believers are destined for Mount Zion. This is a heavenly Jerusalem defined by joy, an innumerable company of angels, where believers arrive not as terrified servants, but as the fully redeemed church of the firstborn. But hold on. The speaker lays out a pretty massive caveat for anyone thinking they're just going to easily ascend to this heavenly Mount Zion. Pointing to Hebrews 12:8, they detail what they call a foolproof test for salvation. The theory argues that true followers absolutely must experience divine discipline. The speaker essentially throws a tough rhetorical question right at the audience. Have you actually experienced difficult correction from God? Because if someone claims to be a believer but has never gone through spiritual hardship or chastisement, the speaker is completely blunt about it. Based on the harsh language of this verse, they are not a true child of God and will be left behind. It's a really uncompromising warning against that sort of comfortable, lukewarm religion that wants all the perks of faith without ever going through the refinement of the fire. Building right on that idea of discipline, the speaker sums up this intense warning by pointing to the tragic biblical figure of Esau. You know the story. Esau actually sold his massive eternal birthright as the firstborn son for literally a single bowl of soup, just because he was feeling a little hungry in the moment. I mean, imagine the absolute short-sightedness of that, being so desperate for immediate physical comfort that you trade away an inheritance meant to last forever for one meal. The speaker uses Esau as the ultimate cautionary tale for the modern church. The message is simple. Do not trade your spiritual inheritance for temporary earthly comfort. The clear implication here is that modern believers who prioritize daily convenience over these urgent prophetic warnings are running the risk of completely missing the prophetic timeline and the grace of God entirely.
And finally, part 6. The tracks converge. The final dates.
All right, we have reached the grand finale of this massive 14,000-word presentation. This is where the speaker ties all of these incredibly complex threads together. When you take the geopolitical chaos of track 1 and layer it perfectly over the deep typologies of track 2, the custom full moon calendar, the exact 430-year math, the day-by-day countdown at Sinai, and those harsh spiritual warnings from Hebrews, you hit a very specific mathematical intersection. The speaker calculates that this massive prophetic convergence is going to happen on either July 18th or July 25th of the year 2026. Let's do a quick recap on that math. The full moon on July 1st, 2026 kicks off the third month. The 18th of July is the 18th day of that month, the exact day God descended on Sinai with fire and trumpets. The alternative date, the 25th, represents the day Moses walked into the glory cloud 7 days later. The speaker impartially lays it out. One of those two dates marks the definitive end of the track. So, what does all of this mean in the end? The speaker draws a really weighty thematic conclusion from all this interconnected data. They strongly argue that the rapture isn't just going to be some silent, secret escape pod for believers to dodge hard times. Not at all. Just like God descending on Mount Sinai was a terrifying physical test for the Israelites, which they failed by refusing to listen, this upcoming event is going to be the ultimate, world-shaking test of humanity's faith. The sudden, undeniable physical arrival of the glory cloud over Jerusalem will force every single person on earth to make a final choice. Those who have accepted the discipline of God will ascend to Zion, while those who traded their birthright for comfort, just like Esau, will be left to deal with the absolute political chaos playing out on track 1. Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question to chew on from this massive study. When these intricate ancient blueprints finally collide with modern history exactly as the speaker predicts, will the world actually be ready for the sound of the trumpet? Thank you so much for joining us as focused learners today. Remember, if you want to verify the math or read the entire 14,000-word breakdown yourself, definitely click the link to the original creator's channel in the description right below this study. Until next time, keep learning, keep analyzing, and stay curious.